But there's little nuances like that, and we finally found the best nurse. If too much small talk is not cool. If you're a person who's about to get, everyone varies, but Rachel didn't like nurses who would just, who would say anything about like this nurse that we found was all business. All she cared about was Rachel's comfort. She didn't ask questions about how's everything going. She just came in, all business, right? Gave her all the right stuff, the Benadryl, at the exact time. She knew exactly when Rachel was most vulnerable. She was just the best, and she remained our chemo nurse, or Rachel's chemo nurse, until the end. And but those little nuances I would always keep in mind. And my goal for chemo day was to sit quietly, not fuss around too much or get a magazine or nothing. My goal was to sit quietly until the oxaliplatin started, make sure that she didn't have a heavy reaction either emotionally or physically as far as swelling goes, itching, because that could happen sometimes. And I would sit and I would listen. If she needed water or juice, I realized she would prefer me not to get up, but to ask the nurse for some water, because too much movement around her could cause nausea. It was just little things like that. So I always knew what to bring. And, we'd bring this big bag of stuff, and maybe she would want her iPad or something. But really what would happen the best of the chemo days would be the oxali would start. She would feel like shit for a little while, uncomfortable, and then she would fall asleep. And my goal was to just remain quiet, help her voice all of the things that she would need, to get a nurse if things were going wrong, which many times they did, and she would have terrible reactions. And we'd have to stop the oxali or slow down the rate of the infusion was another one. So if you get a different nurse and they don't know that, Rachel's rate of infusion is, whatever it may be, like 3 cc's per whatever minute or something. I remember having it written down. Then that nurse might give it to her too fast, and she would have a reaction. So those things were important. And eventually we got it to where I would know the first hour, just getting her in there and and getting the infusion started was important, until she would fall asleep. And I always knew that if she was falling asleep and she woke up and I wasn't in my chair, like I had gone to get a drink, then she would get a little worried. So I pretty much figured out the exact like algorithm for her chemo. And the moments that I do like to remember and I don't want to fade are the moments of her waking up briefly and seeing me in the chair across from her, making eye contact. She would just look up, and I would see in her eyes, like the first thing she would do when she opened her eyes, she would look to make sure I was still there. And then when she would see me still there, she would make like this little smile. She'd close her eyes and she'd go back to sleep. And I remember there are a few times where I would sit and I'd watch her getting the infusion, sleeping. And I would just lose it so quietly. Just lose it, because no one's prepared to watch the one they love slowly lose their health and sit in a chemo ward, chemo section of a hospital, getting an infusion, wrapped in fucking blankets and with their little like just like her little hands just, and as time goes by and you think about those days, you miss them. I miss them. If someone said, hey, you could go back and be in that chemo ward with her another 8 hours, I would say, please, yes, let's do it. I just miss her, and I miss being there for her. Rachel was a go kind of girl. It was hard to catch her relaxing ever. And after she was diagnosed, she changed a lot. She slowed down. Of course, she had to slow down, but she really slowed down. She just stopped with anything that wasn't truly something that mattered. And I got moments with her, long, real, meaningful moments with her. After years of only getting sporadic, real moments where we were both slowed down and really with each other. And her being diagnosed just stripped away the bullshit. We were able to just be brutally honest with each other. And when we said we loved each other, we fucking meant it. And I tallied up all the hours that she spent getting chemo, 72-hour infusions. She didn't always get it every other week. There were a couple times where she would skip. But 72 hours for almost a year and a half is a lot of hours getting chemo. And when she would get home, we'd get her upstairs as fast as possible, just, especially if it's cold, just from the car. Before the infusion would stop, I would see the time, and I would know, okay, this infusion is almost done. The nurse is going to come and undo her, and if you're dilly-dallying around, it can cause big problems for Rachel. She would become nervous, and think about it, all of her good chemicals are just destroyed. So I had the system down where she'd be almost done, and I would quietly pack up my bag. I'd have a little phone charger. I would just wrap it up, put it in the bag, and I would get her boots out. And I would untie them and loosen them so that they were easy for her to just stick her feet in. I'd tie them, and then I'd get a wheelchair. No matter what, after the first couple times of her saying, I don't need one, I realized it's just better this way. She shouldn't walk. She'd be very nauseous. I would get her mittens out, because that was important if it was cold. After oxaliplatin, if you receive oxali and then your hands touch something super cold, you'll have nerve damage. Potential permanent nerve damage, but you'll certainly have it for the next 2 weeks. So we'd get mittens out, a little scarf, bundle her up, not too much because she'd get very hot after chemo. Put her in the wheelchair and just quietly and quickly get down into my car. I'd make sure my car was pulled up. We'd get her into the car and take the ride home. And just get her home safely and without too many bumps in the car or anything, because meanwhile she's got a pump attached to her in a port in her chest going right into a main vein. And she would go upstairs and lay in bed, and I'd usually make sure she had yogurt, or she loved these key lime pie parfaits. It's weird what chemo does to you as far as what you crave or what's disgusting to you changes, your taste changes. But I hated to see her not eat at all, so I'd always bring up a fruit and yogurt parfait. She wouldn't eat much, but she would pick at it. And she liked having juice, little diet sodas and juices and stuff. Maybe a little bucket in case she got queasy. And she would just lay there and until it was over. The next day she would wake up and maybe lay in bed and draw, and sometimes she would do a class or something if she could handle it, but towards the end, the chemo really wiped her out. She would just hang out in bed, have a normal day and relax and hopefully sleep, and after 72 hours, it would go back in, and she would have her pump unplugged, and she would have her line flushed with heparin. Something that you can do at home, actually, but we'd always go in to have her unhooked. Maybe once or twice she stayed home and unhooked the pump. But, that way there you return the pump and all that. But what they don't tell you is that, years ago, you'd always get your entire infusion in the hospital. They would admit you and you'd get a little bed and you'd have your infusion, your 72-hour infusion in the hospital. But they changed that. And they now give people a pump they go home with. But what they don't tell you is your insurance company won't pay for that pump once you're home. It only pays for it while you're in the hospital. So after all said and done, I changed her address to my address, so I still get I still get bills in her name for that pump, fuck that. So, that's chemotherapy, my experience with it. I could go into more detail, of course, but these are only 40-minute. I only get 40 minutes on these, so I'm going to end it there, but it's April 2020, April 21st, and it's the pandemic. And the reason why I'm thinking about chemo is because of this pandemic, and I thank God that she didn't have to go through treatment during something like this. I just can't imagine. Like, as hard as you might think it is for yourself, or you're going stir crazy, imagine if you're having to get chemo infusions. Like, your level of exposure and the threat to you dying from this thing would be just monumental, and it would add to the stress. It's just a nightmare. Chemo itself and that diagnosis is a nightmare, but having a pandemic show up, forget it. I can't imagine just the mental nightmare it would cause, never mind if you got it. So it's been on my mind, but that's it for today. Again, if anyone hears this that I don't know, or anyone who actually is going through something similar or would like advice, obviously you can always email me at jtlamags2386@gmail.com, or you can look me up on Facebook. It's Jed LaMagdalene. And I think this usually goes onto YouTube, so you can always send me a message there as well. But that's it for today.